Hey everyone, you're here because you've probably purchased a mallet kit from my shop, and I'm going to take you through the step-by-step process to create this mallet. Fully customizable, different sizes, shapes of handles, leather, wood type, all of that was included in your kit and you got to make the selection. So let's talk about all of these parts and how these parts will turn into your mallet. Let's take a look. All right, so let's talk about shop safety first. This project is a lot of fun, but there are a lot of things in woodworking that are risky and dangerous. You'll see things on this video that you may not be comfortable doing. That's okay. There are a lot of ways to accomplish every step in this process, and if you can't figure it out, find somebody that can help you feel comfortable, feel like you know how to use the tool before you attempt to do anything that you see in this project. I really want you to enjoy it as a learning experience, adapt and overcome. If you don't have a tool that you see in the video, find another way to do it. And I encourage you to find it. Don't rely on others for alternative options based on the tools that you have. That's a way that you can grow as a woodworker. So let's enjoy this project together. I hope you really learn something, and I hope you get a great mallet at the end of the day. All right, so you've opened your mallet kit, and this is what you found. A lot of parts. Let's talk about what they are. The first is the main mallet head, which is created by 3 components. You have your side pieces with holes drilled in for alignment pins during the glue up. You have your center component that has the lead and epoxy weight added. That's where all the weight is coming from. You have an angled mortise and tenon, which is gonna receive your handle that is pre-sized to fit. And here you can see that as you add wedges and drive those in during the glue up process, this spreads and becomes mechanically locked together, creating a really durable mallet. This is fully customizable handle. You can create curves with the template that I've included, or you can totally build it however you'd like. Those wedges will go in to the top during the glue up, which locks it on. So you're gonna do all your shaping prior to gluing it up. One of the basic shapes that's on the template is just a curve on both sides, followed by a chamfer bit, and that creates a really nice, comfortable handle that's not too complex. You can see that here as well. Another thing that you're gonna find are these alignment pins, which is all part of the glue up process. Keeps everything from sliding around. You're going to find, if you've purchased the tooling leather faces, you don't have to have a leather faced mallet, but it does create a nice impact and delicate on some woods. This you would glue on and trim up. We'll show you how to do that. You're gonna have sandpaper for shaping, final finishing, things like that. You're gonna have a leather handle tie. You're gonna have a microfiber rag for finishing, gloves for finishing, wood stick, Q-tips for glue cleanup during the build, and a pair of hearing protection earplugs. You're gonna have a bottle of satin Osmo, which will create a really nice satin finish on the mallet, and it's super easy to apply and a lot safer than a lot of finishes. So let's take a look at how we take all these components and build your mallet. Our first step in the process is gonna be joining these 3 pieces together. This dowels are actually universal, so it does not matter which orientation they go on either side of the mallet face. What we're going to do is take our alignment pins, and we are simply going to take the side pieces and add a little bit of glue, just a drop in each to kind of lock the pins in. I'm gonna push those in. Use whatever you need to get them down. And literally this is gonna keep it from sliding. So if you get 2 in or you get all 4 in, it's not critical, but it will keep it from sliding as you squeeze it together. I'm gonna put enough glue on. It's gonna come out in the process that any squeeze out, anything like that, will be taken care of fairly easily. So I like to take a brush and literally just get the glue spread on evenly. No dry spots. We're going to take our pieces, and you can see here that this side is actually covered in glue into our slot. If you do that, that's okay. But what I would suggest is, prior to the glue up, just wiping some of this excess off in the center, and that'll make it a lot easier to clean up and after the glue up component. Okay, we have our blank, and now we're gonna get some clamps. After we put our clamps on, I like to just put a couple on. You can put 4, you can put 1 on each corner, whatever you'd like to do, whatever you're comfortable with. You can see here we got squeeze out, all the way around. I'm gonna crank that down. I have squeeze out everywhere that I want. And I'm going to point out to you that these are roughly cut to length. They're really close, but sometimes they're not perfect. That is not critical. What is critical is the fact that once this blank is made, that we can take our pieces and square it up, and we are actually going to get rid of most of that excess, and it's going to fit well together, and it's not going to be a worry. So don't worry that things aren't perfectly lined up. We're going to take our wooden stick, and we're really just going to clean out that glue as best that we can. Again, the outside of your mallet is not critical, because we are going to clear most of that off by cutting it away. One option, if you want to get real fancy, is on the dry glue, practice glue up. You can put some blue tape, trim it to fit, and then glue up, and then try to remove the tape afterwards as it's clamped. It's not critical, but everyone likes to work a little differently. I'm going to take a damp paper towel and just wipe off that excess glue. Makes it a little easier in the cleanup, although not critical. Completely not necessary, but if you want to, you can take your template and put a piece of double-sided tape on it, so that once you cut the pattern out, you can simply place it on the blank and it's ready to go. Another option would be roughly cut it out, stick it on, and follow the line. Whatever you'd like to do. I'm simply going to take this and cut it to a rough outline of the curve. Because it's customizable, it really is just allowing you to have a good starting point of a curve. You can create it as steep or narrow as you'd like, rounded a lot, rounded a little, all totally up to your own personal preference. Okay, so now that I have my template with this double-sided tape, I'm gonna find my end and put it on exactly how I'd like. I'm gonna take this template, I'm gonna put a pencil line along this edge just in case the paper falls off or moves, and then I'm going to show you how to cut this shape out or sand it out, whatever you'd like to do. Just gonna run my pencil right down that line of the paper, just as a backup. One option for shaping this final handle is with a spindle sander, a powered sander, a spoke shave, whatever you'd like to do to get that shape. I'm going to use this round profile because it creates the curve really quickly and easily. A small benchtop The spindle sander would do the same. After creating that profile, I took a chamfer bit and put a nice edge all the way around the handle. Our next issue after the glue up is this needs to be flattened and square. So how do we do that? There's a couple options. You can use a belt sander, a hand plane, a regular orbital sander, whatever you can do, and then reference it to make sure that it's square. You are able to use a jointer or a table saw. However, this piece is so short that it is a higher risk of danger. So let me show you how I use the belt sander, and then I'll show you also how I use the hand plane as an option. So now that we have our reference established, we'll take that and clean up the rest of it. I like to have my blade lower than the block so that it protects me as I cut, because I can then simply flip it over and cut the remainder. So I'm going to take my reference edge that we just created and put that against the fence. This is flat. I will simply go and clean this up with the sander, and then we have our reference edges all the way around, and the last bit will be cleaning up the ends. Next step in the process is creating the angled faces, which allow for easier contact when using the mallet. I've set a gauge to 3 degrees, and I'm going to simply put that on the wood and mark the angle. The critical portion is actually the fact that the bottom of the mallet is smaller than the top of the mallet. So if your angles are incorrect, your mallet will not function correctly. So the larger measurement is the top, because that's how our flare on the tenon works. And we are going to slope down and in and down and in towards the bottom of the mallet. So I like to have my top marked T, and then I'm going to slope down and in, down and in. That is my visual reference for the correct angle. Now I'm going to take my gauge, put that on, and mark it at the 3 degrees here. And I'm just going to establish a line. I'm going to come back over and do it again, establish a line. So you can see my mark is here and here. Well, the problem with that is, what's the center point of the top? Let's actually take this to the bench, and I'm going to show you how to center this up left and right from the center of the mallet handle. So I've got my mallet head. We've marked our T for the top. Now I need to get a measurement on the narrowest amount of material that I have available. I'm measuring 5 3/4, so we're going to split that in half, which is going to give me 2 7/8. So I'm going to take my reference edge on the narrowest piece, mark 2 7/8 in. I'm just going to double check from this side, 2 7/8, and my measurement is right there. It's just a hair under there. I'm going to take a square and strike a line for the center. I'm going to continue that line to the front, find my line, and mark the center. So now when I mark this edge and this edge with the angle, I know that the center of the mallet head is centered on the handle.
So I want to remove as minimal material as possible. I'm going to start here, mark my line, now get a measurement on that, and what we should get is 1, 2, and just under 7/8, 2 and 7/8. I'm going to measure again, 1, 2, and 7/8, right to the edge, and mark my line. It should be pretty close, but there is a chance that it shifted one way or the other based on how the blank was cut. So I have my lines marked. Now I'm gonna go cut them. You can cut them on the chop saw, miter saw, or you can use a table saw sled as another option, but let's go check that out. Using a very basic miter gauge, I'm gonna use a sacrificial fence, cut it, add my blank, and now I can see exactly where I'm going to cut. I clamp the blank onto that piece, and I'm going to push through the blade, making sure that my fence is out of the way so that the offcut doesn't get stuck. Pull it off, rotate it over, making sure that my taper is in, lining it up for the cut, clamping it on, and making the cut. That has produced my angled faces on the blank, with the top being the widest portion and the narrow portion being on the bottom at the correct angle. All right, so we've cleaned up the mallet, we've cut the angles. Now we need to check that the tenon on the handle will fit the mallet. So we're gonna look for the narrow side. We're gonna try to push it in, and we're gonna see that it's probably a little tight. So using a file, a rasp, sandpaper, whatever you need to clean out any little bits of glue that may be in the way, just lightly hit all the sides. And we're gonna do that in small amounts until we get the fit dialed in perfectly. So I'm gonna push that in, wiggling it in, there we go. It slides in all the way to the shoulder of the tenon, and you can see that it's a tight fit all the way around. On the top, you should have about 1/4 to 3/8 of an inch sticking out, and you should have some slop for the angles on the side walls to accept the wedges and mechanically lock this piece together. So that will be the next step with glue and wedges after we do the final shaping of the mallet head profile. We're gonna take that template and finish cutting. I like to have kind of a rounded football shaped head. And what I do is just check and make sure that we're good. And I'm gonna be removing quite a bit of material. So in order to accomplish that, I could lock it in a vise and use a hand plane and bring it down to that curve. I could use a power sander, a belt sander, a spindle sander, whatever you have that can remove a lot of material quickly. But what I like to do is actually put the template, center it up, trace my profile so I get a general idea of where I wanna be. And then I'm gonna take it to the table saw and cut some of this waste off at an angle, another angle, and then sand a very small portion and feather that out into a nice smooth curve like you saw on the original mallet. So to get rid of a lot of that waste that we drew out, we're gonna set the saw blade to 15 degrees. And we are going to then set this blank up so that we're not cutting past the halfway point on the center of the mallet. I like to go about 2/3 of the way down and then line up my blade to cut at about the 2/3 way through point. And you can do that by sighting down your blade in the blank and then moving your blank over. So now that I've done that, I'm going to make a cut at 15 degrees, flip this blank over, cut at 15 degrees on the top. I should have a flat here that I can reference on this fence, flip it over and do the same thing again for all 4 sides. So you can see here that I've created the shape that we're looking for as a general starting point. Now I need to clean this up. Again, on this, we can either sand the profile and rock a orbital sander along that arc and just eyeball it,
we can take a hand plane and segment this all the way around until we get a nice smooth curve, and then really finish it up with the sander again. That sandpaper works well to just kind of hit the light spots of shaping. So let's show you both ways on how we do that. So I'm just gonna take a hand plane and make a couple shavings along those lines. And I'm constantly rolling my plane. And you can see that I'm creating a round. Sanding is another way that I like to do it. The key with sanding is you constantly got to be moving, otherwise you're going to put a flat spot on this piece. So what I'm doing is I'm watching the curve and then checking my line and making sure that I'm close to that line. All the shaping has to be done prior to the glue up, otherwise you're going to be interfering with this handle that's in the way. All right, so I've got the mallet kind of showing the process of wedging the tin in once it's through. And what we're gonna do and what's critical is that these go down evenly so that at the top, when this is cut flush, our widths match as close as we can on these lines, and it just looks better visually. So after I pull these out, I wanna show you, I have pre-shaped, like I said, the mallet head to this rounded edge shape. I've sanded it. Some of the work has to be done after this is put together, but a lot of the shaping has to be done prior to gluing. Otherwise, you're just gonna struggle. And what I also wanted to show you is you can make it however you'd like. This is the template, and I actually ended up with a lot more meat on the sides. And so I just left it and made it visually pleasing for this particular mallet, which is exactly what you can do. So let's talk about the next step, which is gluing. And all that we're going to do is glue this piece together. And when we glue it, I'm gonna put glue inside the mortise, a little bit in there, a little bit in there, all sides. And then I'm gonna take my finger and literally just get it in there. A lot of this glue is gonna get pushed out as we go. So that's why it's not critical. I like to have a wet, damp rag around just for cleanup. Now the critical part is I'm going to get some glue here in that crack and in that crack. I'm gonna take my brush and just put it on. Get some space. Okay. So I'm gonna take my mallet head. I'm going to push the wood in, the tenon into the mortise, and work it in. You can see I'm going to come through up here, and there's going to be some excess glue. That's okay. I'm just going to wipe a little bit of it off so that it's just not pouring out everywhere. As I do that, the next step is going to be taking my wedges. What I like to do is put a glue bead here, grab the other wedge, and just put them together and get all the sides. So now I know I have enough glue. I'm just barely gonna get this one started, lined up, because it matches the width of the mortise. I'm gonna get this one lined up and started. Once I'm there, I'm gonna really make sure that my handle is seated properly. I'm going to set this here. Let me set the camera up a little bit further back. Set it up so that when I hit the wedges, the force is being stopped by the table. I'm gonna hold the mallet head, and I'm just gonna take my other hammer and just tap these home until I can't go any further. And I'm not tapping super hard. The critical part is watching and making sure that these are even. We want them to be even. Okay, once that's done, I'm gonna take my rag and just wipe this glue squeeze out off as much as I can because it will be easier to clean up in the end. And you'll check this in a couple minutes and there'll be more glue squeezed out. It's just part of the process. But for now, we let that sit. Locked together. All right, next step is gonna be taking this off. And what we're gonna do is cut the bulk away with the bandsaw. You can use an oscillating tool or a sander, whatever it takes to get this bulk taken off. And then once I get really close to the mallet head, I'm gonna take a sander and flush it up and then start the process of finish sanding and finish. So check it out. So, as you can see, I'm about a 1/16 or a little more proud, and that's really easy to clean up with the sander, hand plane, whatever you have, that'll take care of that. As you can see, after it's been cleaned up, we have pretty even wedges, and that contrast really shows off the joinery detail. So next up, we're gonna final sand this thing. I'm gonna punch a hole for the leather strap that I forgot about, and we're gonna apply leather after we do the finishing. So let's start that process. Because I missed punching a hole in the handle, I'm gonna do it now as the mallet head is attached. The problem is if I drill, this wood is unsupported, there's nothing behind it, so I'm gonna have blowout. So I'm just gonna take a piece of plywood and stick it under, and it is flat underneath, which is gonna protect the back side of this. And I'm literally gonna take a pencil and just kind of eyeball where I want to drill by centering. I'm gonna drill about a 1/4 inch hole. And anything around there will fit the leather through. I'm gonna use a brad point bit, find my center point, get it started, try to straighten up, and then I'm going to hold the mallet. A drill press would obviously be better, but this will work for now. Okay, gone through, and the back side is protected because of the backing plywood. So nice hole. Next steps are gonna be sanding, final sanding. I'm gonna add water to pop the grain, sand it again, and that really helps with the final finish. And then I'm gonna show you how to use that Osmo satin oil. All right, so we've got it all sanded. We're gonna take a damp rag and just pop the grain a little bit. So adding the water raises the grain as the water dries, and we don't want that. We want to have a really smooth finish after we apply finish. So what I like to do is pop the grain first, sand it a final time, apply the finish, let it sit overnight, and then apply a second coat, then we're done. So I take a damp rag and literally just wipe down all the surfaces of the wood, and that'll dry fairly quickly. You don't want it to be super, super wet. Just a damp rag is fine. Different woods are gonna pop at different amounts. This maple would probably pop more than the Purple Heart because it's just a different type of wood, and the Purple Heart is very, very dense compared to the maple. So you can see it's already drying almost instantly. That's enough water on the wood for this process to work. So I'll just do that a few more times. Okay, we'll let that sit, and then we'll sand it a final time with your highest grit sandpaper, and then we'll apply the finish. Just a couple notes on the shape and faces. If you're going to be applying leather, you want this to not have any kind of profile on the edge, because you'll put the leather on first and then cut it to the shape of the wood. Some people like to do leather on one face and wood on the other. And then you can put a profile around this edge. So that's really up to you and how you want to do it. If you even want leather, you could shape both sides with the chamfer bit or sanding, any kind of tool that can shape the edge, you can do that. And it's not going to be a problem. But this is very difficult to glue leather to and then trim to that shape. So I leave the outside fully done, no profile, apply the glue and leather, and then trim to final after I apply finish. So that's what I'm going to show you next, is finish. All right, so we're going to take our gloves and our microfiber rag out, our Osmo out. I had to tape it so that it doesn't spill on you, and it comes off fairly easily. Go ahead and put your gloves on, and what we're going to do is actually cut this microfiber in half, because you only need a small rag to apply the first coat, and you only need a small rag to apply the second coat. So I would just grab a pair of scissors or a knife, whatever you need, unfold this and cut it right in half. More than enough rag here to complete the mallet. So save the second one for tomorrow, and we're going to shake our Osmo. And this is a very forgiving finish. You're going to kind of fold your rag over into a square. None of this is critical at all. I like to then take my rag and cup it a little bit and pour just a very small amount so that it starts to soak the rag, about like that. Once I do that, I just apply, and we're gonna flood the surface of the mallet, handle, everything, and we're gonna add to the rag until it is fully saturated, because that's really gonna help us just even out the finish. So we wanna get it just heavy on the wood everywhere, and apply as needed to soak that rag. Once the rag is wet, it really can spread very far on the finish. So I apply it on all surfaces. If you're gluing, you're gonna wanna either tape this off or very minimally apply finish on here, or you're gonna have to sand it back to apply the glue for the leather. All your hard work is finally paying off, and you get to see the curl in the wood or the color that you chose, the combo, and it's one of the best parts of the whole process is the finishing process. And this Osmo makes it so easy because it's essentially a wipe on heavy, let it sit for a few minutes, and then you're gonna wipe it off and get rid of all the excess. So I like to get that in there, soak it up, and start rubbing in the excess all around the mallet. And this is a hard wax oil, so it'll repel a lot of things like water, sweat, some finishes, some won't repel, but it'll be good for a mallet. It's a nice satin finish, so it has a good look, and it's not too slick or shiny for actually using the mallet as a tool. So I like to let that sit for a few minutes, and then I'll take a paper towel and just wipe off any excess spots that you see pooling up. If you don't get those off, it will get sticky, and you're not gonna want that. So we'll let this dry overnight after I wipe it down, lightly scuff it with the sandpaper, and then we're gonna do a second coat, and then this mallet is done, ready to use. All right, as we're wrapping up, I wanna talk about this rag, and it is soaked with oil, which is a shop hazard. This can combust. It will dry and create some heat. So do not leave this wadded up in any kind of trash can or any kind of location that can catch fire. What I like to do is actually lay it out completely flat on a piece of concrete where it just dries really well, and then I dispose of it the following day. But that's very critical. This is an oil finish, and that is a critical step with oil finishes and rags, is you do not leave them wadded up, contained in big piles in the trash until they are dry and ready to dispose of. While we wait for that other mallet to dry, what I like to do in gluing the leather is to use a 5-minute epoxy, and I just glob some right in the middle of a piece of leather, You can use regular glue, you can use hide glue. There's a lot of options here, but I prefer 5-minute epoxy because then it only takes a few minutes to clamp and hold into position, and then you're safe to move it and do the other side. So I just kind of get it started on this face of leather, the suede face. I then take a little bit and I put it on the mallet, trying not to get it on any of my finish. You can tape it off if you'd like, but there's inevitably going to be some that gets on the mallet. So you'll just have to deal with that after it dries. It's not too hard. But I spread it to the edge so that I have no dry spots on the wood, but not super thick because I don't want tons of squeeze out here. It's on a finished piece. Take any excess and just put it on that leather because it soaks into the leather. I take it to the edge of a bench or a table and I put my mallet down right into the leather. Let that set for a second, and then I take a clamp, making sure that I put the swivel point on the angled face of the mallet. Take it to the bench, and I find the center of that mallet, and I just lightly push until I get some pressure. We gotta let this, if I clamp it down, it'll just shift because the epoxy is not setting yet, so it takes a little bit to get it going, but I'll do that. Slowly adding more pressure until it stops shifting on the leather. After I put significant pressure on there, you can either let this dry like this and clean it up and deal with it, or you can try to get the excess off now while it's still wet and tacky. And I like to take that stick, get off a lot of the excess as much as possible. And that just makes cleanup a lot easier in the end. I like to take that damp rag and wipe as hard as I can to get it off. All right, after that, we let it sit for about 15 minutes or so, and we're gonna pull it. We're going to apply another batch of the 5-minute epoxy right to the center of the leather and work it out. We don't want it to be too heavy anywhere, but we also want to make sure there's enough soaking into the leather so that it's not dry and actually bonds to the wood. Glues will all be the same. The difference will be how much working time you have and how long you'll have to leave it clamped before you can move on to the second half. I take that leather, let it sit, spread it out on the top of the wood again, making sure there's no dry spots, really getting it into the end grain is what's happening, and the fibers on the backside of the leather. That's why it's such a good bond. And after we do that, I flip it over, set it on my leather, kind of work it in and let it sit for a second so it stops sliding around. And then I'm going to take a clamping block because this other leather is still a little delicate in placement. So I'm going to do that and clamp it again to my bench or table, whatever you have. Locking it down from sliding around and trying to get in the center of that mallet when I clamp it. And as I bring it down, it'll stop moving around. But we got to be patient. So I'm clamping it as much as I can. I'm going to take that stick and remove the excess while it's still wet. Going to remove as much as possible from the wood. And because it has a finish on it, if we work quickly, a lot of it can be taken off and it will not stay on the wood because that finish is a barrier. checking in the light, making sure that everything is wiped off that I can get off. And then we're gonna let it sit for 15-20 minutes while this cures. And then we'll trim. All right, after we know that that's dry, we'll go ahead and pull that clamp. And now we have our leather that needs to be trimmed on both faces. So the best way that I found is finding an X-Acto knife or a razor blade that you can put down on a piece that you can cut through. And we're going to take nice and gentle passes until we get the line established. And once the line is established, we'll cut through the leather a little bit at a time. So this process is a little tedious, but you get pretty good results. And you can be careful not to break your blade like I did. So swap that out real quick and I'll finish this up. After we get the leather trimmed, you can see that it fits really nicely around the curves and it's glued on. It works really well. The next step will be taking our leather strap and we're going to then apply a knot in the middle by folding it in half, pushing it through our hole, and we're going to take the tails, running them through the strap for a simple loop like that. At the end of the loop, we are going to just tie a knot. So bring it around and through, trying to keep the ends even. And the leather can be a little stiff, but it's fairly easy. Pull as tight as you can, and you got a leather strap for your handle to make sure it stays on. So there you go, leather face, cleaned up, ready to go. Leather handle, safety, just to make sure you're not losing the mallet as you throw it. So pretty cool. As you can see, there's the face of the leather trimmed. You can dye this leather, but really it's gonna get glue and all kinds of stuff on it. So it doesn't really matter. All right, you did it. You made a mallet. You made a tool for your shop in your shop. So I hope that you are proud of the piece that you created. I hope it's something that you'll use on a daily basis. And I really wanted to show you that you can do it. You can build something from a raw part all the way through the process to the end. I built this kit for beginners through experts. So I eliminated some of the hurdles in getting started. I really hope that everyone got something out of this that they didn't know, or a skill that they developed. That's part of the process. Problem solving. If you don't have the tools that I have, you're not comfortable with the process that I used, that's all okay. You got to build it and create it how you wanted to. You chose the next step. That was a critical skill in developing your woodworking skills. I really hope that you enjoyed the process, and I really appreciate you purchasing the kit from me. Help me out one more time and like and subscribe to this channel. I want to bring you content on woodworking from beginner to expert. It doesn't matter. I like to show what I do in the shop on a daily basis. I want to help you along the way. I want to learn together and build that community. So I hope to see you here again. Thanks, and check out my other videos.